Hey, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Embellish Podcast, a podcast focused on product stories, product storytellers, interesting brand ambassadors, and anything else we happen to come up with. Whether you're a bourbon fan, a geek, a casual observer, or someone just floating through this channel, I hope you find it interesting. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com, and I'll try to get that taken care of. Also, I generally live stream the recording of these episodes on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or Twitter with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today is Tuesday, November the 18th, and we're going to be talking about and with Black Button Distilling. We're going to talk about Empire Rye. And I've said this a number of times, but I think that innovation in the whiskey marketplace, specifically in the United States, is going to increasingly come from craft distillers, and maybe even more specifically craft distillers that sort of have a similar mindset, and they kind of set on a path towards a standard similar to what Empire Rye is. If I think about American Single Malt, Indiana Rye, Pennsylvania Rye, Empire Rye, these are all things. And so that's going to be part of today's conversation. But when I started digging into Empire Rye, because that's, I'm in Kentucky. I don't know a ton of things about Empire Rye yet, aside from what's published out there. I reached out to Black Button, and Alex got back to me really, really quickly. And so I'll let Alex kind of introduce himself, and then we'll get into the meat of it.
Yeah, no, John, thanks for having me on. I work with Black Button Distilling out of Rochester, New York. So we're a grain to glass distillery using 100% New York grown grains for all of our mainline spirits. And Empire Rye is one of our big kind of love projects we got put on early on in the Empire Rye movement as one of the original 6 distillers. So my job, I work with our production team and marketing and sales, and I manage the barrels, the blends that we do, also kind of our used barrel sales. So I get very fortunate. I get my hands on kind of anything from when it's at the barrel or when it comes out of the barrel, and all the great aged goods coming out of Rochester, New York.
Awesome. And curiously enough, one of my coworkers was actually based near Rochester for a while. She's back in Western Kentucky. And so we sat down and talked about your distillery a little bit, because she had actually had a few things from you guys. But you have this, you kind of mentioned your grain to glass. And what does the grain to glass mean for you guys? Because it can vary by distillery to distillery. It can mean that you're the actual farm, or that you partner very closely with or contract with an actual grower, or you're just sourcing it from a local location. So kind of which one of those things, or what variation of it do you guys kind of feel there?
Yeah, I mean, grain to glass. I mean, we also say farm to bottle. I think we have a couple different ways we like to look at how we work. So we focus on using local producers that are very close to us. So in New York, we're a part of what's called a farm license, which means we have to use at least 75% New York grown ingredients to get that license. It allows us to work with other farm producers. We can actually act as a liquor store and bar as long as we use only farm produced products in New York State. So I can carry brewery, winery, other distillery products at my tasting room and sell them right out the door, which is a nice advantage for us. All of our grains are coming from Edgewood Farms, which is just down in Groveland, New York. That's probably 45 to an hour away from the distillery, right in the Finger Lakes. All of that where it was dug out by the glaciers. So they've got really, really deep soil beds they're working off of. Really great growing conditions for the corn, the wheat, the rye, and the malted barley that we're working with. And we even have a local malt house that's right around them that actually does our malting. Small family, just a mom, dad, and kids that run around this malt house doing all this great malting for us, and also providing our rye as well, which gets us into the Empire Rye a little bit.
Yeah. And so you guys use, and maybe you don't exclusively use it, but for the Empire Rye, on the bottling itself, it indicates you're using Danko Rye. Was that something they were farming and you guys found worked well, or did you partner with them and say, hey, we would like to see this particular one? Because there's a lot kind of being made of the variety of rye that's being grown. If I think about what Mammoth is doing with Rosen Rye, and I think about a handful of other places everybody's talking about, Bruisey Rye, whatever. Were they already there, or did you kind of bring that change forward?
Ironically, that's not the first thing that I know off the top of my head. I know that we were looking for this kind of a rye because it's big, it's fat, it's got great protein in it. So it's going to bring over the character we want in the rye. And it just happened to be something, I believe it originated in Iowa. So that's going to be, similar enough growing conditions that come into New York. Our climate's going to match that well enough. So we can actually have a rye that's really hardy. And again, we're fortunate rye itself is a hardy growing grain. So it's something that works really well in a cold climate like New York State.
Yeah, and it doesn't grow super well in our state at all. So
yeah.
You guys, so I want to kind of jump back a little bit to the distillery. I was looking on your website,
Sure.
and you have the ability to blend your own bourbon, right? That was one of the experiences that was available on the website, and that's something that not not everybody's offering. Is that like a single bottle offering? Is that you got to do like multiple bottles or a barrel? You got to do a certain volume, or is it like how does that work?
At this point, I mean, we started doing this. It kind of goes back to how we were trying to get consistency in our own batch to batch blending. So originally, we're blending a couple of barrels at a time to make a batch of our 4 grain when we got to be a straight bourbon. Then we're saying we're taking a family of maybe 10 barrels. We're putting those together. Every time we are still focusing on being as good or better. But barrel to
Mhm,
barrel, we're going to find inconsistencies or slight changes. So we started a process of categorizing every barrel of our 4 grain mash bill as a sweet barrel, a spice barrel, an oak barrel, or what we call our fourth characteristic, which is base. All that means when we're talking about base, it's kind of got all of them. If you took it to a party, you wouldn't get kicked out. It's fine, but it's not unique or special enough to be put into one of the other ones or be considered a single barrel. So
mhm,
we take those characteristics, we break them down into stainless tanks, and now we have these 4 tanks that are full of all of these different characteristics. So we can actually
mhm,
blend different percentages of the tanks together, and that's how we're actually custom blending our 4 grain bourbon. So we're looking for a certain characteristic in our market batch, and now we can actually offer.
mhm.
You could come in yourself. Generally, right now it's more on the store level. 10 cases at a
Yep.
time or more. But we have done some smaller things for retired military who's just looking to do 10 bottles. We bring them in for the afternoon. I'm hoping maybe when we
Mhm.
do move to our new location, we find a way to offer that more to the public. I think it'd be a cool offering similar to like what Heaven Hill does.
Yeah, and so, I think about they have magnitudes of scale and the ability to kind of absorb these things, but even at 10 cases at a time, you're still looking at a local bourbon group that gets together, a group of guys. That is a thing they can achieve, right? That's something that they could do as a group. It's not like you have to buy 500 bottles or 1,000 bottles or whatever. You've
Sure.
got a number that kind of hits here. So I noticed that you guys, do barrel finishing on your bourbon. Is there any interest in doing that with rye? Have you experimented with that? Is that an opportunity?
We haven't gone down the road with rye just because rye is so hard to work with. Like we love rye. I
Mhm,
love the character that comes out of a batch of rye, but the actual grain itself, it's dusty, it's sticky, it's a mess to work with.
mhm.
And it's not very costly. It's massively large rye. My screen before I'm safe. I'm thinking I might turn my background off if it's causing issues here.
Yeah, it very well could be my connection as well. I've had spotty internet for the past 2 or 3 days too, so it could be me.
Let me just start this off. I'm willing to let everybody see my lovely basement, and we'll keep going
Mhm,
from there.
no problem.
All right, so let's see if that makes any better. Either way, but
Yeah.
yeah, we play around with finishings. We definitely like doing bourbon
Mhm,
finishings as well. I think the idea of doing rye finishing is exciting, and
mhm.
soon, we're looking at doing kind of an experimental program as well. So we might be able to offer more of that down the line. But today, we just haven't gotten that way.
So is the experimental program just across all of the distilled offerings you have? Are you looking specifically in bourbon or rye or one other thing, or is it just like we want to experiment everywhere?
It's going to be more of experiment everywhere. I think
Okay.
we're just going to see what we've got in the warehouse. Fortunately, we've already had stuff laid down that the distillers have said, hey, let's try a different mash bill. Let's try a different yeast strain. Let's finish in a
Mhm.
new way that we haven't done. So we have a higher end finishing line. We do a port. We do a apple brandy. We're going to be coming out with a tequila soon. Those are kind of set at a higher end line that we're working off of. But now we also just want to kind of get down and dirty and just see what we can play with.
So you said you're moving to it. You're planning to move to or are moving to a new location. Are you staying in the area, just looking at a bigger spot, or you open a second? Is this like what does this growth look like?
So we're going to move into a new location about 5 minutes from where we're at right now.
Mhm,
We are an urban distillery. We kind of want to stay that way. I mean, Rochester is kind of at the heart of everything we do. So we're going from a spot that's about 5,000 square feet to a spot that's going to be 28,000 square feet. So the new tasting room will actually fit in the current distillery. So that's going to be pretty exciting to be able to move into that much space
uh,
and now pump out, from barrels a batch, we could go to 20 plus barrels a batch when we start to run.
What is your, I guess, what is the opportunity for a person like me in Kentucky who's like, hey, I want to try anything Black Button has? Sometimes craft distillers have a difficulty kind of stepping outside of regional offering because of logistics. What does your footprint look like? Do you have an online presence? Is that a thing?
Yep. So we are doing online. Kentucky is one of the states that's not too difficult to ship to. Fortunately, we don't offer everything necessarily. I mean,
Mhm.
I love the 3-tier system. I'll say that live. If we get off air, I may tell you something different. Uh, but we work with a good network of retail partners in Mash and Grape, who offers Bar Cart, which is actually our platform that we ship through.
Mhm.
The partners in New York are great. I don't like to inundate them with too many things, especially around the holidays.
Mhm.
But we do kind of do like, maybe we'll put up 100 bottles of something that's available to ship out of state, and
Mhm.
just kind of keep it limited and keep things flowing through. So definitely
So
opportunity.
if I'm looking online, I would imagine I can probably see the bourbon. I might be able to see the rye. Can I see the apple brandy as well?
The apple brandy finish, we did a limited. We might have a bottle or two kicking around.
Mhm.
The port finish, we normally keep up online. That one's a little bit more often that it's available. And then the rye is always available as long as we have it in stock. The cask is always available. The 4 grain, 84 proof, our standard offering. So
Mhm.
a good portion, especially the whiskey. And I think a
Yep.
lot of that just comes. We're seeing people want to spend a higher dollar if they're going to be doing shipping anyways.
Mhm.
So we'd rather offer them those higher end whiskeys, offer our entire
Yeah.
whiskey line so that they can get their hands on those products they're looking for.
If I'm gonna have to pay for shipping, I'm gonna go ahead and buy 3 or 4 bottles instead of just one, because I can spread that shipping cost out. Even though it does scale up a little bit, it's not your biggest hit on shipping is the first bottle, and then everything after that is a slight increase.
And we give free shipping on 3 bottles anyways because we feel the
Oh,
same. If
perfect.
you're gonna invest in 3 bottles from us, we'll cover
Right.
the shipping. That makes sense to us.
That's awesome. So, kind of shifting a little bit, we've talked about Black Button, and you guys are one of the founding members of the Empire Rye Whiskey Association. Did I get that right?
Yep, we're one of the first 6 distilleries that started it. Yeah.
Okay. And so, um, kind of explain, I guess maybe the first part is right now there are 10 current distilleries that are a part of the Empire Rye group, but there's 18 that are committed. What's the
Yep.
difference between those two numbers? Like, what is committed versus a part of mean?
I think committed is just in barrel mostly,
Hmm.
or they're planning to produce. So, for instance, there's a new guy, New Scotland Distilling. I mean, he's out of not far from where I'm at, Akron, New
Hmm.
York. He's very small. He just started like a year and a half ago, right around the time the pandemic kind of kicked off, 2 years, I guess now. And he's just starting to put things in barrel, but he's either put something down or is committing himself to put something down.
Okay,
So
that makes
it,
sense.
yep,
Yeah, that was the one that I had an idea of what it meant. I just wasn't
yep,
entirely sure, and so I guess the want and interest to kind of define these categories usually comes from a sense of heritage. Pennsylvania has a sense of heritage. Indiana has their own sense of heritage. There's these things that are out there. So what is the history of the idea of Empire Rye? Kind of absent of the association. Just like hey, this is a thing that's rich to us in New York.
yeah. I mean, rye was probably, I think it just in theory was more prevalent than bourbon was in New York State before the pre-prohibition. So that was the grain that was more prevalent. It was the style of whiskey that was more prevalent and brought over. I think even from Dutch settlers that was set into New York State. So we knew rye better than we knew bourbon. So once the prohibition kicked in, all those distilleries went out of business. And when people came back to drinking whiskey in the United States, bourbon was really the prevalent spirit. So rye never really took back off, which I think we've seen with all of these new re-emerging styles of rye, is that they are, we don't necessarily would say Empire is the style that was there, in 1905, but at the same time, rye in New York was very, very prevalent. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the idea of bringing back something to New York that goes back to growing heritage, that goes back to spirit heritage, and that really showcases the state well. So now we can have something like Tennessee whiskey, like Kentucky bourbon, but we can make it right in New York. And
Mhm.
similarly, you have to make it in New York. That's the only option if you want to be a part of the group.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that bourbon geeks kind of get off on the United States, but the reality of it is that rye is historically the first major spirit in the United States. It is. There's like
Yep.
that's the anthropology of it. That's the way it has been. I guess we can lay claim to it being our native spirit bourbon because it utilizes corn, which is native to United States, North America, whereas rye was brought here as a similar thing, but neither here nor there. So,
Yeah.
we've talked about it. What is Empire Rye? Like, how are we defining it now? I mean, you said it's not necessarily what Empire Rye, what New York Rye might have been
Sure.
pre-prohibition, but you've got a definition now.
Yeah, so it's at least 75% rye that's New York State. You've got to use that New York State rye. It kind of goes back on the farm license that's available here. The other 25% of the grain, you can do whatever you want. We are barreling at no more than 115 proof. We are 2 years of age once it comes out of the barrel at the bare minimum. And then it does have to be made in New York State. So I think those are pretty much the big key points.
Mhm.
So, for instance, we're heavy rye. We are going 94% rye. We're just shy of doing an MGP style. And again, that Danko, that New York State style of rye, it does offer different characteristics than I think, going back to that idea of terroir. People debate it
Mhm.
in spirits. I wholeheartedly believe it exists. I think it is something that does affect, our climate changes things, the grain that we're growing the grain differently in the seasons we're playing with. I think it has a big effect on that final pour in the glass.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong for sure. And so, whenever you're whenever you guys sat down, and maybe you were part of it, maybe you weren't, but whenever somebody sits down to say, okay, we're going to hammer out some kind of guardrails to what we want New York Rye or New York grain, New York Empire Rye to be, what is
Yeah.
that process like? Did everybody already have an idea of it, or did you like sit down in a room like you're drafting the Declaration of Independence and yell at each other for like 5 days to come to the final solution?
So ironically, Black Button wasn't a part of the original concept
Okay.
meeting. I think it was New York Distilling. I think it was Van
Mhm.
Brunt. I believe Tuttletown was a part of that, and maybe Kings County. The other two are Finger Lakes and ourselves that are a
Mhm.
part of the original six that actually produced and started this idea.
Gotcha.
So it was a really New York City heavy start, or Hudson Valley heavy start. And then we were two of the other large, prominent distilleries in the state. And when we all got connected, it just made sense that we could spread this across New York State if we work together to create this. But I think really, if we look back, kind of where did it start? It really goes back to the farm license,
Mhm.
because all of us were a part of that. And when you start to look at, well, what's that opportunity in New York? Well, let's use this license that already exists to kind of help give us some guidelines to where we should go with. And that's going to be like the distillers who are in this are going to be following that New York heritage, that New York pledge to support New York State. So I
Mhm.
think those things coming together made it a little bit easier. And then from there, it's, go make the best rye you can make as a distiller within those guidelines.
Now, and this may be a loaded question. This may be the one where you tell me I'm not going to answer that question, and so that's perfectly fine. Um, kind of looking at it, so it's 75% New York grain, 25% can be any other grain, whatever you want to do with it. Distilled at 160 proof, aged for 2 years, no more than 115 in barrel proof, and then mashed, fermented, distilled, barreled at a single New York distillery. Are
Yep.
there any of those that you would change if you were given an opportunity right now? Say we're going to change one of these, or do you feel like this is the right path?
I mean, honestly, I think it is the right path,
Mhm.
especially our own practices. I mean, again, most of our spirit after a few years of aging is coming out at about 116 to 120. So
Mhm.
we're pretty comfortable going in at that 115 range. I think that creates a good spirit in our climate. I mean, maybe you bump it up a little bit more, make it slightly more New York grain. That would be the
Mhm.
only thing that I would consider, because I know that's for us. We're 100% New York grain on our four grain, on our rye, on all of our key spirits we're producing. We're using 100% New York grain. That's the big difference maker, I think, in Empire Rye and that license that we work with.
Yeah, and that's so it feels like, because I've had this discussion with other distilleries about maybe say American Single Malt, and the category that they're pushing forward and their definition, they feel good about it, except for the fact that it's 100% malted barley instead of just 100% malted grain of any type, right? So it allows
Yeah.
for kind of more exploration, and so this feels like it gives you an appropriate set of guardrails, but still leaves enough freedom where you don't end up with another 150 distilleries making 95.5 rye, which is still going to vary because you're looking at New York
Yeah.
versus Indiana. But is that variation as much as opposed to what you guys are doing, which is 94.6? And personally, my taste buds can taste a significant difference between 95.5 MGP rye and this, in a positive way, at least for a bourbon drinker, because it just tastes a hell of a lot sweeter to me, which is
Yep.
great. Um, but you can go all the way down to 75, or you go up to 100, 100%, whatever you wanted to do. It gives you some kind of ways to play. But I also noted in there, and maybe I read this wrong, um, there is an opportunity to blend an Empire Rye if all of the components meet the standard of the rest.
think it would be really interesting to do a project at some point now that we're getting a little more mature, where maybe we go to Finger Lakes and we say, hey, you know what, let's do a blended project where we actually take our two Empire Ryes, we blend them together. I think that's going to be the exciting thing as we continue to grow this. Hey, in the 10-year anniversary, do we all come together and offer a percentage of our own juice and pull something together? We're gonna have to play around with that a little bit because we're big on blending. Jeff Fairbrother, who I work with on a daily basis, he's the production distiller day to day. Jason Barrett's the owner and founder and master distiller for the company. Jeff and I were very strict about our blending. We take a lot of time. We might go 8 to 10 rounds before we're happy with the blend. So it would be fun to get that many talented palates and talented distillers in a room with everybody's juice and almost have somebody come out and blind percentage blend a few of these and just see what we were happy with. But that's the great thing. As long as we're all following it, if you can create a really cool rye based on using all our juice, that's an exciting idea.
Yeah, and that's kind of the direction I was heading. I was like, because this is there's a distinct opportunity where if you have a grouping, and it feels like it's mirroring some of the things that happen in Scotland with Scotch specifically, where they have their guardrails, but then they have this ability to blend based off of all the components are the same thing, and I like that. And like I said, being the nerd that I am, I want to see the result of that experiment. I see what a ton of blenders are doing. I think about the guys at American Mash and Grain, and they're doing their own borrowed page blend, which is fantastic. And it's maybe kind of the ways that when the bourbon bubble busts, right? Rye is going to still be standing, blending is still going to be standing, finishing is going to still be, but nobody's going to care as much about the mass quantities of MGP bourbon that are sitting on the shelves. And so I want to see the innovation.
Well, I think that's cool when you talk about the blending idea there. I think people look at blending as a dirty word still.
Exactly. And I think that's changing right now. I think we're going to see that in the next 4 to 5 years is going to change significantly.
Well, I think for some reason, I don't know why, nobody realizes that the majority of the bourbon they drink is blended bourbon. The only, you can grab a single barrel, that's great. And we have single barrels. But my joke is always that a single barrel is the best or the worst bourbon you've ever tried because it has to be a perfect barrel. And most of them we find aren't perfect barrels. They need a little bit of help from the barrel next to it or the barrel the other side.
Yeah. And I would challenge that, at least in my experience, most single barrels are the best ones that I've ever had, and they have to be the worst for the distillery because now there's a different standard of expectation for flavor for my part. If I'm not really thinking about it, that your blended product's not going to meet. But there's people that are like Penelope and Smoke Wagon that are making waves in the bourbon industry right now, and that's all they blend 100%. So I think that's changing. I think that people will probably feel even more comfortable when a distillery is saying we're just blending our own stuff for our partners that are nearby, and not like I'm buying 1,000 barrels from MGP and creating a blend out of it, which seems
there's nothing more exciting than when we do this blending process and I take something from let's just say it's 30-30, 20-20 right across the board for the 4 tanks. And if I just go to 29.5 on one tank and go to 29.5 on the other, just to showcase, you start pulling out little half points from tanks or adding one more, their mind gets blown by how much that can actually change. And they're like, this is the same barrels, the same blend, the same mash bill, the same juice, and we're just tweaking it a touch, and it can completely make or break a blend. And that showcases how much art goes into that to really create excellent bourbon for the shelf.
So when you do a blend, right? Do you blend and then taste it a day later, or do you taste it right off? Like, what is your process there?
So we're going to be working very like high school lab feel. So we'll come out, we'll pull out the tanks, we'll go into 1,000, a liter cylinder, pull those out, the 4 tanks, and then we'll actually break things down into an Erlenmeyer flask with a spinner plate and a magnet. So we're blending it and actually doing that on the spinner to help combine the juice a little bit. We don't want it to kind of layer and sit, so we want to get those flavors to meld. So we can actually showcase what we believe blending together and letting a tank sit for 3 or 4 days is going to actually be. So the tanks you work with today, those are the tanks we're going to blend off of. That's going to stay the same. We're not going to add more barrels to that until we make your blend. Once we add new barrels, even though it could be 1 barrel, but it's just enough, we want to make sure we're matching that. So that's how we kind of continue to be able to blend everything together, give you the full experience that day when you're blending.
Okay. Yeah, because I've talked to different people. I've talked to the guys from Penelope. I've talked to the guys from Borrowed Page or American Mash and Crane. And sometimes they'll create a blend and they'll taste it, and then they'll taste it 2 days later, and then 4 days later, and you kind of see it
Yep.
kind of evolve over a pattern of time, and you kind of you don't know exactly when it's going to stop changing, but kind of introducing the idea of, well, we
Mhm.
can scientifically probably solve some of this, or at least get a lot closer without having to sit on it for a week or whatever needs to occur.
Yep.
Um, so you guys have settled on 115 as your what you would prefer to do, and that's also what the Empire Rye needs to be. Um, and we had this kind of wonderful experiment that came out of Maker's Mark in the last year where they said, all right, here's our stuff. We normally do 110, but here it is at 115, at 120, and 125. And ultimately, at least in my mindset, they proved that 110 was the right choice for them. Um, did you guys run through trial and error to get to 115, or just because you're like, this is where we're going to be? Like, how do you settle at 115?
That's an interesting question. So this is going to be one of those when I'll say the days prior to Alex working at Black Button Distilling,
Yep.
there was definitely a decision made, but I know that we're comfortable with that decision and we haven't made a
Mhm.
change yet. So I would assume we've trialed a lot of things. So my guess would be there was some trial and some, looking back, talking to other distillers. But the other side of it, I mean, honestly, Jason, when he was starting, he went and learned from like Dry Fly out in Spokane. He went and did, Michigan State. He went to Cornell and he studied under them. He might have just been building his recipe kind of based on some of the background he was picking up from other distillers and from the study he was doing. So I'm not 100% which way we got to 115, but I know we've been there for a long time, and we're
Mhm.
really comfortable with how the juice is coming out with that.
Um, and so the distilling process puts you in a situation where you come out of the still, you go into the barrel at 115 proof, you're coming out of the still no higher than 160 proof, so you're having to proof down,
Yeah.
and then whenever you come out of the barrel, you're likely proofing down again because this Empire Rye is sitting at, I think, 96 proof. Is that correct?
Yep. That one right there is 96.
Yeah, and so there's this concept of proof dilution that happens, and in the FAQ section, you guys talk about how you think that having to proof dilute with less water has more impact, and can you kind of expand on what how you feel that impacts?
So we talk about proof a lot. I think even over the last year, or 2 years, I have, along with Jeff, have been spending a lot of time debating at what proof we want a lot of our market items to go out at. We don't change the 84 proof. That's Jason's kind of starting point. That's always been our flagship. But we used to do our cask at 110 proof. So we actually used to take our cask strength down a touch. And I think a lot of that was we were liking where it was at 110. It's easier because I don't have to post a new proof every single time we release a new release with New York State.
Hmm.
But recently we started deciding to let's let the juice speak for itself when it comes to like cask strength releases. So I've got a couple of single barrels of rye that are 117 proof. At the same time, we still wanted to have this rye that you're tasting for the market and not have to increase the cost too much. I
Hmm.
mean, we're already at $75 a bottle, which for the process and for the ingredient and for what goes into it, we do believe is competitive just based on how much goes into making that bottle. But we actually took it from 84 proof to 96 without changing the price. And we're just really excited for the change in characteristic. It did open up a lot more flavor. It brought in a little bit more richness overall. And I think it really let the rye speak a little bit better. So I am definitely of the world of a little bit higher proof is going to open up the spirit. But
Hmm.
I am also of the world that high proof is not always the best for the spirit. There is a fine line to ride there.
Yeah, and the further you get into whiskey, the more likely you're to end up being a proof hound, where you're like, oh, I need to have the most proofy thing that's out there because if I want to
Mhm.
water it down, I will. But none of us are professionals. Well,
Yeah.
most of us aren't professionals, and maybe we should probably trust people who work at a distillery and say, hey, this came out of the barrel at 137 proof, but it doesn't taste good at that. Like, it tastes good. Like, we know where
Yeah.
the proof needs to be, and we'll proof it down and get it down to 115, and it's delicious. And
Mhm.
like there's very few places where we're regularly second guessing the quality of somebody's decision making. Like, I'm not standing back in the kitchen at a restaurant saying, no, no, flip that steak for me right now, flip it. But whiskey nerds kind of get
Yeah.
off on that conversation for sure. So the Empire Rye Whiskey Association has their own emblem, right? And
Yep.
you get to stick it on the bottle whenever you do that. And obviously there's some um trademarking, copywriting. I don't even know exactly what the legal term would be.
Sure.
Is there an interest in ever trying to put that into a actual standard that is kind of on the books with, TTB or New York or whatever?
I actually don't know what the next steps would be for the association. If I were to look at it, I would hope so. I think that if the style continues to grow, I mean, again, we only have just shy of 30 distilleries right now that are either in or committed to do it.
Hmm.
So, but let's just say that people across, you're in Kentucky, you're talking about Empire Rye. That's exciting.
Hmm.
I know Breaking Bourbon podcast, they've talked about it. So, like when you start seeing guys, yourselves, podcasts in the whiskey industry that are talking about Empire Rye, that's great. I would say 0.5% of the whiskey consumer in our country, and probably less, has actually ever heard of Empire Rye, let alone try one. So
Hmm.
it would be hard for us to make that a standard right now. I think we just want to let enough people either experience it in New York State or get involved. But I think making it a standard, in 5 or 10 years, when I would love for half of the whiskey nerds to have heard of it. And
Hmm.
I'm going to tighten that up. Let's go with the nerds because they're more likely to be the ones that find it rather than someone that just picks up Jack Daniels and that's the only thing they've ever heard of in
Right.
whiskey.
Yeah, and that's a real common occurrence. I mean, that we are really talking about a subsegment of the marketplace. But I know,
Yeah,
specifically when American Single Malt Commission decided to start taking their standard forward, now you're in this position where kind of when they began the idea, there weren't that many American single malt distilleries in the United States. But by the time they
sure.
get to the TTB, there's a lot, and everyone has an opinion, and you're gonna kind of buck up
Yeah,
against it if your American single malt doesn't meet that standard, right? There's nothing preventing someone from slapping the word Empire Rye on their label. They just can't
no,
use the little, they can't use the emblem that is a part of
yep,
it, right?
exactly. And I think that you're right. Like the single malt, the American single malt is still fighting. I
Hmm.
still actually don't know that they've actually gotten that broken through, but they're close. I think we're getting there. And I
Yeah,
love that
they're
you
on their
brought up the
second round of
idea.
public comment, I think.
And that's the other side of it. It's like, are we even ready to go there? Even though I think
Right.
ours is it's a little clearer. I mean, look, we're
Yeah.
not going up against a style that is set in Scotland. We're not going up against a national
Hmm.
style. We're
Hmm.
talking about a style for a state. We could probably get it through a little bit easier. It's a little more
Yeah.
cut and dry. But I like to believe that anytime we submit something to the TTB, it's going to be that easy. And I don't think I've experienced that once in my life. So, but I do love what you were talking about with the single malt taking itself beyond malted barley, being
Hmm.
an open to malt grain. Because if we're going to create a style in America, let it open up. There's no
Right.
reason not to malted rye, malted barley, malted whatever. I mean, there's millions of grains we could try.
Malted corn.
Yeah,
There are things out there, and so can maybe dovetailing off of that slightly. And you mentioned dry
sure.
fly, and you know, I'm I'm a big fan of the Triticale whiskey that they
Yep,
made, and so that's kind of like a weird grain that exists out there. And I had some friends that I put on a blind, and we ran through, and I said, I'm gonna educate you. This is what corn whiskey tastes like. This is what bourbon tastes
yep,
like. This is what bourbon with high rye, and this is what bourbon with high wheat tastes like. I'm like,
yep.
now I'm gonna give you this last one, and you tell me which one you think it is. Like, is it a corn whiskey that has rye, or does it have wheat in it? Like, what's in here? And obviously, because the grain of triticale is a hybrid of rye and wheat, it picks up some of the characteristics and does something slightly different. And so they're all confused. And it was like a fun event, but it's a weird grain that exists. Is there anything that's like a New York staple of grain that you guys aren't making whiskey with that you wish you were? Is there like something in the market that, man, like I want to chase that down as an experiment? Because you were talking about experimental series.
Yeah, for New York style grains, we haven't gotten down that road yet to go
Hmm.
incredibly specific to something that grows in New York, but we would not think to go that way. But we have been starting to talk. Triticale is a great example. We have
Hmm.
kicked that around. Like, do we want to go down that route?
Hmm.
We've been so set to our four grain. That's been our mash bill since day one. That's what we've done. We're just starting now. We're starting to have some three grain mash bills. Either a contract project we had done for somebody that maybe they didn't want all the barrels, but we have an opportunity to take back that juice and put it out into the market because it is our juice. We made it. It's a mash bill we work with. We do a pre-pro mash bill. That's our main three grain. That's like an 80-10-10 corn, rye, and malted barley. That's kind of where we started to say, let's not get away from four grain. It's our main grain, but let's look at what else there is. I know we've talked about like chocolate malt. Like, what could we do
Hmm.
with like a chocolate malt in a bourbon? Again, what can we do with a high rye? What can we do with could we do a malted rye? Could we play around with different malted grains as well? So we're starting to turn that corner. We're just starting to kind of think about that and see what else we can come up with.
And I love the chocolate malt idea because I mean I've had other people that have done some things with chocolate malt and it's
Yep,
delicious and it kind of fits right into the whiskey thing. And you said you guys do a pre-pro mash bill. Now we're talking about pre-prohibition, right? And so how
correct.
do you identify that as like how do you say like this is a pre-prohibition mash bill?
Just something that I think Jason, when he had come up with it, he'd actually read about a mash bill very similar to what we had done as something that was
Mhm.
being made pre-pro. And again, we're looking for something that's a lot higher corn for a bourbon mash bill that was done prior. I mean, the four grains, we only started really seeing them become popular in the last 10 or 15 years. So
Mhm.
even when we came out with our 4 grain mash bill, there weren't a ton on the marketplace. And now, obviously, PH Taylor has their 4 grain that everyone goes after. And beyond that, there's a number of New York distilleries that have or are coming out with 4 grains. So I think that really heavy wheat backbone is starting to become more prevalent, mostly probably because people are so in love with wheaters at this point that they're like, hey, what if we create kind of a wheater and we put that
Mhm.
out into the marketplace?
Now, do you guys make a 100% wheat whiskey of any kind?
We don't, and I don't recall seeing anything on the barrel sheet right now. I know we're going to come out with a couple different. I think we're coming out with a higher wheat 3 grain mash bill, something that's been
Mhm.
sitting in. Again, something that may or may not ever actually get into a bottle, depending on how we like it when it gets through the
Right.
warehouse. But most likely that'll come out either as a release for the tasting room, or a few barrels makes it out. We've got a high rye mash bill that's sitting in the warehouse right now. I think something in like the range of 27% rye in the mash bill. And that's more like Jeff, our distiller. He has a strong belief in what should be a high rye for the number to call it that.
So, whenever you get down to I think you sort of described this when you get down to doing a blend, you've dumped
Sure.
barrels that didn't necessarily make it into your single barrel program. Is that a correct statement? Like you're like these are good, maybe not great. When you're selecting for your single barrel program, are you looking for things that are weird, or are you looking for things that are kind of like the best version of what you guys make? Because I know with clubs, they're all sort of different. People that go in and want to pick a single barrel or a retailer. Sometimes they
Yeah.
want something that tastes like the standard expression, but elevated. But then there's
Mhm.
those other people that are like, I don't know what this is, and I want to taste it again. Like this doesn't make any sense. Like, like how do you pick what goes into your program?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that what we've looked at is it. We have thought that we would never look at what's on the weirder side of things, but mainly we are focusing more on kind of what's the most complete
Hmm.
and what showcases all of those main characteristics. If we're looking at the sweet characteristics, the spice, the oaks, we're looking for all of those in a really complete manner that almost is the barrel itself is basically representing what a blend could do. So when we get that really complete single barrel, that's what makes its way through the program, and that's what actually gets that labeling.
Okay. And so, do you guys do any experiments with advanced aging? Do you have anything that's because you're sitting anywhere from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years? You guys have been around
I think my
roughly for
audio just went
10
out.
ish years. Maybe it may be me. Um,
Yeah, some. Oh,
are you still there? Can you
I
hear me
just
now?
lost my headphones on you. Hold on a second.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh my goodness. Why did that? I think we're back.
Oh,
There we go.
can you hear me now? Yes? No?
I can hear you.
Oh,
Who
perfect.
knows? I'm all good. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry about that, John.
no, that's fine. So you guys have been around for 10-ish years now. Um, do you have any advanced age stuff? Are you guys
Yep.
looking to do advanced age?
We do have some stuff that's going to sit around right now. The oldest we've released is about 7 years. We put that into a blend for anniversary bottling. So a couple of 6-year 30 gallons and then a 10-year 53 or 7-year 53. Sorry. That was our oldest barrel that ever got put out. I think we might see some 7 and 8 year olds come out next year when we come into the new space. But it's still going to be limited. Most of our 30-gallon barrels we like to keep between 4 to 6 years, kind of at the max when we start to age those out. They just become too tannic, too oaky. We start to lose some of the characteristic. Same when we were doing 15s, 3 to 4 really kind of peaked it out. Our assumption is most of our 53s are going to be somewhere between about 5 if they're just stellar right at that point, and probably about 8. But we will have a few that'll sit around till 10 years, if not a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. So you've mentioned that you've got 30-gallon and 53-gallon barrels. Do you guys continually
I'm
intermingle?
sorry, John. My headphones just keep going out on me.
That's fine.
I might just take them off.
Okay. We're good now? All right. We'll see what happens here. This will give me a good chance to mark off questions that I've asked.
Let's just try to go. Hold on. Why is that?
Can you hear me now? Could be me. It's entirely possible.
I don't know if I can hear you, John. You're probably can hear me. Headphones just don't want to work today.
Here. Let's see. All right. Well, so while Alex is getting his audio sorted out here, I will share that they graciously sent me some Empire Rye whiskey here, and it carries a 94% rye content, 6% malted barley, which is, sort of eerily similar to this MGP mash bill that exists out there that a ton of people are using. But this is significantly different, at least from my particular palate. And after I tasted through it, I went and read some folks that I respect, like David over at Whiskey in My Wedding Ring. And he had some similar notes. Are you able to hear me again?
Let's try it again. I don't know.
Okay.
My headphones are being really finicky today.
No, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. I was just kind of rolling through. You guys were super gracious enough to send me some sample here. And with it being a 94.6, very similar to the 95.5, that can take most whiskey people and put them in a state like, oh, well, I think I have an idea how this is going to taste. And
Yep.
I don't know what your particular thing is, but whenever I stuck my nose into this, it was like I felt like if Bubblicious Chewing Gum Company were to make a sort of cinnamon gum,
Okay.
this would be it. Like, this is Bubblicious and cinnamon mixed together to me. It's like a super sweet candy, light fruit nose to me with just a hint of cinnamon, which usually is what I get from rye.
Okay.
But then whenever I tasted it, it was like a black pepper candy, a little bit of effervescence, and then on the finish, and this may sound weird, I get in trouble because sometimes like things are nostalgic for me, and people are like, oh my god, that's
Sure.
a terrible note. But like an old wallet, right? So you buy a brand new leather wallet, and it has a really distinct leather smell to it. But after you've worn it and used it for a while, it sort of loses the like really overbearing portion of leather, and you get like a more subtle, refined leather smell. And that's what this finished taste is for me. Like, because if I say, oh, it finishes like an old leather wallet, that sounds terrible, but it's like it's just a refined leather to me.
But I don't think that actually sounds terrible, because ironically enough, we'll talk about like musty barn being something like, if we get, I think it has to do with barrel size. So I'm really interested, as we've been trying, 15s to 30s, same juice, same mash bills, whatever it is. Like a 15 might get more aggressive on that leathery, that kind of musty, mature oak, because it has such a tight circumference. As you pick up into the 30s, the grain might pick up a little bit more, and it's starting to take more of a lead, which may create more of the sweetness for you. But still, it's there because it's a smaller barrel that you're getting some of that leather, some of that kind of higher character, that tobacco sometimes even on the higher proof. So I think you're right on point. I think that makes total sense. I also get a lot of dill in here, which is something that one of our distillers said, and now I can't take it out of my mind.
Usually whenever people get a lot of dill, I get a little more effervescence than I do dill. And that may come from like just growing up in a family that did a ton of canning when I was a kid, and so there was
Okay.
just like dill is a really 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 strong flavor to me because of the
Mhm.
volume of it, but usually in a whiskey it's not what I imagine like when I would go out and cut dill out of our backyard to come in
Yeah,
and
yeah,
put in and make dill pickles, right? Because that's a very very distinct smell, but
sure.
it gets sort of a, I don't know, like a weird sensation on the inside of your mouth that comes across as effervescence for me. But you've mentioned so far 15 gallons, 30 gallons, and 53-gallon barrels. Do you
Yep.
guys continually mix barrels on a regular basis, or is this you started in 15s, you graduated to 30s, and then you moved to 53s?
It's mostly that. We still do lay
Hmm.
down a few 15s, generally projects we want to see aged a little bit quicker to kind of get a feel for what they're going to be. And I think rye is really interesting to me, especially New York rye. I'm finding that stuff that's closer to where we're at, because you're tasting a 3-year-old rye, pretty
Hmm.
much right on the nose. That was 36-month old when it got dumped. I think there's fantastic notes on rye that don't need to go 5 and 10 years old. I think
Hmm.
it's specific to that grain and that spirit that it can be held a little bit younger. And even us for bourbon, based on our process, I mean, we're putting the highest quality distillate we can off the still into
Hmm.
some of the best barrels we can buy. I mean, we work with Barrel Mill out of Minnesota, and then Adirondack out of Remsen, New York. The quality of those barrels at the mash that's going in, it's creating such great spirit and character, even at 3 or 4 to 5 years on a bourbon and 2 or 3 years on rye. So right now, mostly it was just 15s and 30s for bourbon based on, we needed stuff to age. We wanted to be making it from day one.
Hmm.
And now as we're able to afford to lay more down, we moved up to the 53s. We can wait the 5+ years to get it out. We just don't like to release anything that at that time we don't believe it's the best quality we can put out that day.
Hmm. And do you guys do any bonded product?
We do one right now. We're doing a bourbon at on tasting room only. So
Hmm.
following all the basic standards. I think the most recent one was a couple of 6-year-old barrels that got put down, 100 proof, same
Hmm.
season, one distiller, all of those pieces. But to be honest, I mean, without saying it, like we were doing our pre-pro this time around at 100 proof,
Hmm.
and if we had wanted to, most of those barrels we could have pulled them out of the same season, one distiller. We could have followed all of
Right.
the right standards.
Yeah,
So
and I think it's a standard that a lot of people will kind of like get really excited about, but I think it meant a ton more, 30 years ago than it does today, because
yeah,
the ability to blend um, inside of a single season is significantly larger because there's just more whiskey that's out there. But one of the things that just kind of like it caught in my brain, and I didn't ask it earlier. Now I feel stupid for it. So in your Empire Rye standards of identity, you don't mention whether it has to be new or used barrels, new or used cooperage. I don't think. Is that a
gotcha.
correct? Is that correct?
I'm pretty sure it's in there.
Okay.
I know, like we use New Oak for all of this. I mean, for anything that we're going to start, all of our bourbon is going to be
Mhm.
on New Oak initially. That's step one. Occasionally, we'll rebarrel something if we think it needs a little help. We'll put it into a barrel that's been used, or we'll double barrel into completely fresh barrels. That might allow us to twist the proof a little bit. Maybe we'll drop down the proof a little bit if we think, same kind of we talked about, that this would
Mhm.
barrel better at 106 proof, that it would barrel better at a different proof. But all of our bourbon, it begins on New Oak. All of our rye always has New Oak. It just depends if we're going to finish on something else.
Yeah, it is in there. I just did a terrible job of copy and pasting onto my notes. I went ahead and opened it over here, and it literally is like aged for a minimum of 2 years in charred new oak barrels. Like here it is.
Right
I
there.
was
Yeah.
just yeah, but when I copied it over here, I just have aged 2 years. Like I just did a terrible job of copy and paste. Just bad journalism. Good thing I don't do this for a living. So and kind of one of the other growing trends is um unique wood finishes. Is
Yep.
that anything that you guys are like? Do you have any access to that with Adirondack or any of your barrel suppliers?
So, like I said, we're doing a port finish. We've been doing that for a long time. As far as some of the standard X Spirit finishes, we've been doing a lot of that.
Hmm.
We're playing around with some stave finishing. We
Hmm.
work with a company out of France, actually, that has some French oak staves that they've offered to us. So, maybe like they call it like an intense. I think it's complex, it's intense. And there's one other that we've done. So we're
Hmm.
kind of interested to see what that does. They had some really unique, and I mean, when I talk in the intense, I mean, it is tannic as all hell. Like it is
That's
extremely tannin forward.
you just put me on a wait list at this point, right? Because I am a very huge fan of French oak finishes.
Okay.
Anybody that does one, I'm really interested in, because if it like it's one of those things that whenever people get into whiskey or sort of they get into spirits, so you get into wine, whatever it happens to be.
Yep.
People generally start with a sweet wine or whatever, but when I got in, I was really interested in give me the most bitter, tannic, driest thing you can possibly come
Yep.
across. That's what I want. That's what I'm interested in drinking. And so then whenever French oak became a thing, when Maker's 46 started doing their stuff, I was like, okay, this is interesting. But then everyone else started picking it up, and I love what it does. I love what it does with whiskey. There's a spice, there's a dry, there's a tannic,
Yep.
it's distinctly different. Not everybody loves it, but I'm
Sure.
now I'm on this list of don't make this a distillery only release because I'm in Kentucky.
Well, I think if we did release something like that, it would probably fall into the experimental program we're working on. So there would be some online bottles I could let you know.
Yes, absolutely. That one and the only other like there's a ton of wood that kind of there's people that are doing chinkapin oak, Mizunara or
Mhm.
whatever. But this Amburana, have you had any of the whiskey that's in Amburana barrels? It's like a Brazilian tree.
I think I have had one in the past. I might be thinking of something else. But what are
Okay.
you finding in that character?
I don't know.
Okay.
It is one of the most
Cool.
confusing and beautiful things. I had
Okay.
a sample of it from I can't even remember who sent it to me, but somebody sent me a sample of one, and
Yeah.
I took and I've got a local liquor store that I'm friends with the manager there, and anytime I get something in that somebody sends to me, I'll take him a sample, and he took it home and texted me that night. He's like, where can I get a bottle? Right. That's where we're at, is a liquor store owner is now looking for a bottle of a thing you can't find. But that's
Sure.
neither here nor that's like a significant aside. But French
It
oak
sounds like a
is
Starlight kind of product. Like I feel like
it,
Starlight
it
would be the
was
guys
so
that.
you're exactly, yes, it was a Starlight, and it was a friend
Yep.
from Lexington sent me a Starlight. They're not the only ones. I think Rare Character has done one.
Okay.
There's a
That
few
sounds
other
right for them.
folks that have done these. Well, I guess Rare Character or someone on their behalf. They're
Sure.
non-distilling producer, but it's a really interesting finish. And wood finishes, I think they're more friendly to me than like port all day long. But when you start getting into
Yep.
I'm doing a Pinot Noir finish, unless you're American Single Malt, it doesn't make sense, at least not in my mindset. What else do I have? I don't know that I've got anything else, and we're pushing right up on the end of that hour. Is there anything that we haven't covered yet that we need to? I guess we need the where do I go to buy, and that
Yeah.
is blackbutton.com, or where we at?
I'm glad you said that's like the one thing I always forget at the end of one of these.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so blackbuttondistilling.com is the easiest place to go.
Mm-hmm.
If you're local to Rochester or around the New York area, there's a way to just come pick up at the distillery. If not, we ship to many states. So, but if you go in and you try to put yourself in, that it'll let you know if we can or can't ship to you. Other than that, you can follow us on Facebook. We're just at Black Button Distilling at both Facebook, Instagram. And keep up with us. I mean, over the next year, it's going to get pretty exciting with the new space. There's some really cool projections online. If you go back a little bit, and we'll be announcing and releasing more about that new space over the next 6 to 8 months.
I assume with the new space, you'll have some sort of a grand opening experience. People need to come out and shake all the hands, kiss all the babies, drink all the
We're hoping to
whiskeys.
have many of those. We're hoping to have a number for local, get a little bigger so we can start to kind of cold open with different groups. But yeah, if the timeline holds, I'm hoping we'll be in there by the middle of the summer.
Middle of the summer. All right. That'll be a good time to be moving instead of January or February. I mean, it might be better to move in the spring when it's not as hot, but it's Rochester. I mean, how hot does it actually get in the summer? I don't know.
We've never broken 100 degrees in Buffalo. So if you want to ever get an idea, we've done 99, but we've never gotten to the triple digits. So I know that's a little different than where you're at.
Yeah,
so we get some pretty massive temperature swings out here.
Yeah, we definitely swing above 100 on a regular basis, and it's like swimming in humidity. But it is what it is. I appreciate you for joining me, and thank you for the sample. This is absolutely delicious. I've already broke off the little piece of it that I've got to take to the local liquor store owner. Be like, hey, try this. You may not be able to sell this in your store, but give this a taste, because he's always interested in what's going on here. I
Sure.
appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to hop on, kind of discuss it with me. Anything you guys want to ever talk about again, always welcome to come back. I mean, my followership isn't huge, but it's always available.
No, that's great. We appreciate that you brought us on here, John. Sorry for some technical difficulties, but we got through.
Look, that is not the
But
worst. Yesterday, my internet completely crapped out in the middle of a live stream while I was talking to somebody else, and it just
oh,
stopped.
geez.
So, it could get worse. It
Yeah.
could get worse.
So, no, we'd love to come back on. I know we'll have a lot more to talk about, but this is great. Empire Rye is something we're really proud to be part of.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're for sure going to have you back on, because we got to talk about the rest. We've only talked about Empire Rye here. So we've got to talk about bourbon. We got to talk about anything else. There's an apple brandy vein in here that needs to be explored, because, brandy is one of those things that us in Kentucky don't know a ton about, but I'm interested in. So, we'll do this again.
Sounds great.
Cool. All right. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, John.
All right. Thanks for tuning in for this offering from the Embellish podcast. If you enjoyed this, please leave a review and do it on whatever platform that you happen to be consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media at Twitter or Instagram using EmbellishPod. Give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, and contact details. I'll be back again next week with another new offering for you. So until then, cheers, and thanks for hanging out.